Welcome to Spare Room Studio, a place to create and relax. Hi everyone, today I'm here with a colour and chat in Serenaiya or Serenaiya by Cristina McAllister. This is an Amazon Australia printed version. I'm going to colour with Faber Castell connector pens. Here I'm showing you what the pens look like and how the caps do actually snap together, and that's where the name connector pen comes from. The pens come in this plastic satchel. This is the largest set that I know of, 80 colours, and they are very much budget priced, aimed at children and the student market. I do enjoy using them an awful lot, and I thought I'd show you how I am using it in this particular book. I'm showing you there that I have a huge plastic tub. I have duplicates of many colours, and I have run out or dried up some colours as well, but I'm not ready to get that new set out just yet. I'm going to try and run down all the duplicates that I have in that plastic tub. So I wanted to share with you how I use these pens. I have done it before, but you may be new to the channel and not seen that, or you may have sort of forgotten about how I use them. But I'm showing how they work on Amazon paper, and in particular this book has got a reasonable amount of grayscale in it as well. So I'm choosing my colours with the suggestion of the grayscale in the background as a guide. So the darker areas I'm choosing the darker greens, and the lighter areas I'm choosing lighter greens. I wanted this background to look quite abstract, so I am colouring quite scruffily, for want of a better word. So I'm not trying to be precise, and I'm not blending. I'm going to use water to blend some of that marker together, but I've very much lately been in the mood of not chasing perfection. So here I'm showing you how the water works to blend some of the colour, and it doesn't blend as well as you may have seen me do in an R.J. Hampson book, for example, because this paper is much more absorbent. It does get very wrinkled and crinkled, and I do try ironing it later, but I do still have quite a few wrinkles in the page. So I'm just showing you here that recently I've been using the Faber Castell connector pens a lot, and I go through and I base various backgrounds, and I've got whips at various stages, because what I've been doing is just when I get a colour that I enjoy using, I go through the book and see where I can actually use that colour over and over. I've been trying to sort of simplify my process down in recent weeks, because I have been feeling really low in mood and low in energy. So what I've been doing is sitting in a chair with either YouTube or an audio book or something going, and just sitting here with the one set of water-based markers, and pretty much this one book, The Colouring Heaven Art Nouveau or Nouveau Fairy Special book by Herb Leonard. So you may hear some noise in the background. It's Hamish walking around. Anyway, what I was showing there was how once I get that one colour that I like in my hand, I go through and look for various sections or backgrounds or pages where I can use that colour, and that's how I've been simplifying my process lately. That's really all I've been feeling like doing. And with this particular page, I start with the goal of just using the water-based markers, and I show you how far I can get with the water-based markers. And then I will attach a different clip where I actually come back at a later point and start using coloured pencil to make it a lot more not detailed, but a lot more evolved colouring of the page. So I think with water-based markers, you will often hear people say that you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. I tend to break all of those rules, mostly because I feel like you don't really get to experience the full extent of what these particular materials or supplies can do for you until you keep pushing the boundaries. And you may get some damaged pages along the way, and I do damage this page quite a bit, which I will show you later in the video. But I feel like that's a small price to pay for potentially finding a new way of working, or a new result, or a new look that you may not have discovered before. I feel like sacrificing a few pages here and there to discover that is a small price to pay. So I thought that was another good reason to do this little video for you, to just show you how much the paper pills and how much it wrinkles and so on. And this is probably very similar to a US Amazon printed paper, or some of the European countries that I've seen their Amazon printed paper. So it is quite thin, it's very absorbent, and I do give it a hard time, but I feel like the results at the end of it are still okay, like I don't feel like I ruined it. So so I'm just working with various greens here. I felt like the background confused me a little bit. In the beginning I was thinking it was foliage, then I looked at it and thought, no, that's sky, because it looks like she's sitting on a rocky outcrop, and at the bottom of the page there is some mist looking areas. But then I decided, no, I'm going to do it as foliage. And so I do go over some of those lines at the bottom, but later I will use an acrylic paint marker to reinstate some of that. Now this particular colour I'm showing you here is quite neon, and when you first lay it down onto the paper it doesn't necessarily read as neon or fluorescent, but somehow when you activate it with the water it just really changes it and it starts to glow like neon does. I quite like that, and I've used it, I'm showing you here, various areas on the figure just to bring in some highlights. And I also used that other one that I placed down there, which is more of a yellow, neon yellow. Now I like, for example, I like that about this particular set there are a couple of neon colours in there, and I just like using them for the highlights. They can really lift a composition, and particularly when there's a bit of a fantasy theme like this page, I feel like the fluorescent and neon really come into their own, and you don't necessarily have to use those colours in large areas, but they're great for those highlights and little areas that you want to either draw the eye to or make a feature of the page. So careful thought about where you put it is sometimes needed, but it can make a big impact. Now I'm quite impatient when I'm colouring on camera, and even in real life in my own colouring. I don't always wait for the paper to dry fully before I start putting extra colour on, and that's where the colours will bleed through to the other side more often, and it's also where I get the most damage from pilling, because using the nibs on the wet paper just tears it up. Now with these Faber Castell connector pens, something that I've noticed is that it's very much a luck of the draw thing, but some of the nibs are much harder than others. Some have a really nice, soft, almost spongy feel to the nib, and others are like a really hard nylon. And there's no rhyme or reason to what you get. I have had the same colour in a couple of different sets, and the nibs have all been different. So there's no real continuity as to how that happens. Like you couldn't say that one particular shade of green is going to have a hard nib in every set, or the blue one is going to be soft in every set. It's really hit and miss, and I guess that's reflective of the price point, that the quality control of the product is reflected in that price. But it's a small price to pay, and once you sort of realise that that is how the nib is, you can adjust the way that you use it, and instead of scrubbing back and forward, you can do just a light feathering motion to colour, and you won't tear the paper up so much. So like with any sort of art material, I feel like there's always a bit of a learning curve when you try either a brand new material to you, but also when you have something that you tend to buy replacements of. I find that you're not always guaranteed they're going to be exactly the same. Even with pencils, I've noticed that, I've had some polychromos pencils that I have had for many, many years that I bought open stock. And then about 2 years ago, I bought the full set of polychromos in the big wooden box. And the quality of the pencil is definitely different. And they don't all feel exactly the same as those older ones that I've had. And I've also noticed it with Prismacolor in the past too, that I've got some older Prismacolor that I bought open stock, and the more recent ones that I've bought are definitely not the same sort of feeling or quality. So when you get something new, I sometimes think it's a little bit of a learning curve to see whether it's exactly the same as you remember or not. But it doesn't take long, and it's no big deal to adjust the way that you work with something to allow for those little changes. So you can see I'm using that neon there again in the lighter areas. So what I like to do with the connector pens is I lay down one layer of colour, and as you saw, I was quite loose and not very careful about how I lay down that first layer of colour. And then more often than not, I will blend it together with a water brush or a brush, a traditional brush with some water. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just leave that first layer to dry, and then I come and work over it again. And I just keep evaluating how the tone and the depth of colour is going with each subsequent layer. And sometimes I will try to blend in a new colour with it, and sometimes I just use the same colour again, but wait for that first layer to dry, and then lay over another layer, let that dry, and gradually it will build a depth to the colour tone. So you can start to put in some shadows, and you can start to put in details and definition by those subsequent layers. And that's what I do in this first part of the video. I show you pretty much how my method of working is, and I look to see how far along I can get without actually adding pencils to it. So quite often my goal is in the beginning to look at it as I am only going to use these markers. And I'm just showing you here that with the Colouring Heaven, I supplemented the Faber Castell Connector pens with the Colours of the World by Crayola, because this set does really lack a lot of suitable colours for skin tones. And I've been finding that I have enjoyed using the Crayola Colours of the World markers to do those skin tones, but also they're really handy as a basic neutral colour a lot of the time too for, rocks, wood, stonework, all those sorts of elements that neutral colours are good as a base for. So here on this one, on the rock, I start with grey as a base, and then later I bring in some other colours with it as well. And although this vision is sped up, you can see that I'm not particularly careful about how I do the marker base, and also how I'm using that water brush. I feel like as I go along I can keep refining it, and anything here that bleeds out of the line can be adjusted further as I go along, but I've actually been not too bothered by that, or I'm trying to teach myself to not be too bothered about when colours bleed out past the line a little bit. It doesn't really matter. If that happens, I tend to just try and think about it in terms of a watercolour painting being very loose, and that's what I'm trying to bring across into my other colouring as well. A lot of the time, the little things that happen where you go out of the line or a colour isn't quite right, a fair proportion of the time we can make adjustments to that as we go along. We can find other things to cover it up, or an acrylic paint pen in a lighter colour to lighten it off. More often than not, we can find ways to work around little things like that we're not overly happy with. Here I'm just checking how many images were in the book, because I did actually do a commentary with this section of recording, but there were noises and other things in the background, so I decided to do this voiceover for it. But one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is that I've been averaging in the high 20s or 30-ish pages per month that I'm completing. And if I was to put my mind to it and maybe just work on 1 or 2 books per month instead of random pages all over the place, I could probably get a few books completed pretty quickly. This particular book's got 26 images in it, I think it is. I'll just check that. Yes, 26 images in this particular book. So by that way of thinking, I could potentially finish this book in 1 month if I put my mind to it. And in the past I've tried that with a few books, as you know. Here I am just showing you a new book that I purchased recently as well. I bought this one because I liked the fact that it had the painted version on the left-hand side, and also looking at it from the perspective of a person who draws and sketches, I really liked the artwork and the style of the artwork for drawing architecture, and it's got nice paper and it's a good quality book. If you want me to do a flip through of that book, just let me know. So, so I was thinking, in the past I've coloured a couple of books from front to back and lost interest in, part way, particularly thinking about the Matchstick Mouse book that I did for Christmas recently. When the book has one character and very similar theme through the whole book, it can be difficult to colour that book from front to back, or indeed just however you want to colour it, but colour that book exclusively. It can get a little bit tedious. And I think of myself as a colourist who is more into the process than the end result. And you would think then it wouldn't matter what I colour. If it's only the process that I'm interested in, it shouldn't really matter what the theme is, but it does. You do get bored with one artist style or one character or one theme. But I just thought that might be something to think about for future months, that maybe I could just limit myself to, say, 2 or 3 books, especially books that have got a fair few pages already done in them, and put a concerted effort into actually completing some of those books. And I'm talking about books that I actually do want to colour every page. I do have quite a few books that I know that I'm never going to colour some of the pages in because they just don't interest me. And I don't feel like I need to colour every single page just for the sake of it. I really only want to colour the pages that give me joy. But I do have a few books, like Reptiloids is probably 2/3 of the way through that I've coloured that. It wouldn't take really that long to push through and complete the book. Yeah, I could probably do that in a reasonable amount of time. And I know some of you would be thinking, well, why bother? You don't have to actually finish a book. And no, we don't. None of us have to finish a book. But I do feel a little bit that I've got some books on my shelf there that it bothers me that I've got so many uncoloured pages waiting to be coloured, that if I could knock off a few of those books and put them aside, I'd feel a lot better about the amount of books that I've got sitting there on that bookshelf. And it's silly, I know, but that's just my personal feelings about it. So you can see here now I'm starting to really look at finishing this image off. I've started to deepen some of the shadows and the tones. Now I'm looking at some of the finer details. I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to approach the markings on her arm and her face. That is one problem with the markers, that you don't necessarily always have enough of the lighter shades, lighter tones that you want. And I just did not want to get a plate or a palette out and start mixing to get a lighter colour. I'm being quite lazy in how I'm approaching this. The approach was, let's do this as simply as possible. And I kind of wanted to show you what can be achieved by just using one set of markers and keeping it as simple as possible. I think many of us, and I know I'm really guilty of this, is that we actually overcomplicate things much more than they need to be. And talking from a personal standpoint now, I find that overwhelming. When I start to get too many things out, too many different types of markers, too many different types of pencils, and then I get gel pens, and then I get this, and then I get that. That actually overwhelms me. The more choice I have sometimes, the more it stifles my creativity. And so recently, that's why I've been challenging myself to just see what I can achieve with this one set of markers. Excuse me. I do apologise, I've still got a bit of a frog in the throat and a little bit of sort of sinus happening, so I do apologise for that. So here I'm just trying to see whether picking up a little bit of colour from the other tip would work to darken this particular blue, but it didn't really. So also on the theme of simplifying and not getting too much stuff out, that's partly why I have been doing the blending directly onto the paper instead of having the plate or a palette or something that I scribble on first. I just wanted to see just what could be achieved by using that water brush and the markers directly onto the paper, and see what sort of results and what sort of effects I could get from doing that. So I'm using a few different methods here. I'm using a darker colour and then the mid colour on the paper directly and blending it together on the paper without the water. And I'm using dots and dashes almost to blend those colours. So there I have taken a short break and used a hairdryer to dry the page off, and then I've come back to start building up the deeper shades of this green here again. I really did need to dry that paper off completely before trying to put some more on, because it was starting to really tear the paper up a lot. So here is where I'm starting to get a little bit more careful in the way that I apply the colour. So a bit more careful in the strokes and dashes and so on. And again, it's a little bit difficult to tell from the vision, but I'm looking at some of the grayscale markings underneath. And here I'm showing you that when you don't want to flood the paper, but you want to soften off the hard edges, you can just pat at the paper with that wet brush. And what it does, it kind of breaks the pigment up enough that it starts to blend a little bit more, and it's not that hard edge to where the colour is drying. So I'm using the acrylic white paint marker here, which is the Montmartre. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know any languages other than English, unfortunately, and I don't always speak that very well either. But it's a white acrylic paint pen. It has the bullet tip on one end and a finer point on the other. And I'm just using that now to start creating a bit of a look of mist. But because the paper is already quite damaged, I find that this paint marker actually does tear up the paper even more again. So I just keep coming back with the same colours over and over, just trying to deepen those tones and get a bit of depth to the colour. And I tend to jump around the whole page rather than focusing on one area and getting that complete. I jump around the whole page, and what I'm doing is once I've darkened one area, so particularly the background, then I start to realise that the dress is not looking like it's defined enough. So I just keep moving back and forward between all the elements and building that colour up until it looks more of a pleasing, combination to me. There are obviously in art many guidelines and tips and tricks to achieve certain things, but what I'm doing on a unconscious level here is I keep looking at all the various elements and trying to get a balance, and obviously you start to feel like there's a focal point to the page, so the focal point is the figure, and so she needs to be highlighted and defined in a greater amount of detail than, for example, the background does, because the background isn't the star of the show. It isn't the focus of the composition. And so, that's how you can bring the attention of the viewer to a certain point. So by putting a few details in down here, down here in that bit of foliage there, it helps to draw the attention to her, so it's supporting her. What I try to do when I'm colouring things like the rock here is I'm trying to tie in some of the colours of the whole composition, into that as well, so that it looks like it's all complementary and a whole scene. So at this point I'm still thinking about, can I leave this as a standalone marker page? Can I get the detail and the depth of colour that I want just with these markers? I don't do it so much when I'm recording, but when I'm colouring on my own, I will keep standing up and standing back and seeing where things need to be highlighted or darkened, so that I don't focus on the detail as such, but just the overall general tone of the page. So there I'm using the acrylic paint marker again in the white to reinstate a few highlighted areas and try and make those wings look a little bit transparent. And what you'll see me do sometimes is I don't want a hard edge to the paint marker. I will use my finger to dab at the paint and soften off those hard edges. Like I'm doing there. I'm just smudging out the paint so that it blends a little bit more and it's not so harsh. So again, once I got the white on there, I realised that, yep, I still need a little bit more dark behind there to make those feathers look like they're in layers. So at this point I feel like that's as much as I can do with those markers, and I'm starting to show you some of the details of how I've left marks where it isn't all necessarily blended. I've got a little bit of gel pen on there for some silver highlights. And I'm trying to show you some of the damage to the paper. You can see down in the bottom left corner there where the pilling is. It's actually torn up the surface of the paper. And what I can do when that is dry, like I'm trying to do there, it's not quite dry enough yet though. When it's dry, you can carefully pick some of those little bits of paper off and smooth it out a little bit. So now I've decided that I will add some coloured pencil. And these are Crazy Art pencils. They're very similar to Crayola pencils. They look very similar. They do feel very similar in the size of the pencil and so on. But the pigment or the lead inside is softer than Crayola pencils. They are very much around the same sort of price point as Crayola pencils. Well, they are here where I bought them. I live in South Australia, and I bought them through a store called Big W, and it's something very similar to a Walmart type of store. And the prices were very cheap. They were very, very similar to the price of Crayola coloured pencils. And I've also got some Crazy Art markers, and they are very similar to Crayola super tip markers. So I decided after looking at the page, letting it dry completely and looking at it, that I was a bit unhappy with the level of damage that I had done to the paper, and using coloured pencil over the top of it can sometimes help to flatten or smooth out some of that paper pilling and make it less noticeable. And I've just felt like there wasn't quite enough definition, not enough depth of tone to some of those areas. And because the paper was getting so damaged, I decided not to keep adding the marker to it, because obviously marker being water-based, you're adding more fluid or, moisture to an already very damaged page. So using the dry coloured pencils over the top was an easier method to get those darks in there, to get some detail in there without further damaging the paper, and actually not hiding but camouflaging some of that damage that I had done to the paper. When the paper is quite damaged like I had there, it doesn't help to use a very sharp pencil either. It's best if you can get a sharp enough point that you can put some detail in, but the point needs to be rounded so that it's not going to tear the paper up further. I haven't used these Crazy Art pencils very much. As you can see, they're not really any short pencils there. They've sharpened okay when I have sharpened them. I think I've had one or two that did keep breaking, but I'd say quality wise they're very much on a par with a Crayola pencil. So again, I wouldn't use it for anything that you want to be light fast, but they are perfect for a colouring book that you're going to keep closed on a shelf. For a cheap pencil, I feel like they're quite pigmented. The colours are quite nice. It's a nice range of colour. And over the top of a marker base, like I'm using them here, they are perfectly adequate. You know, they just do what you need them to do, basically, and that's add some depth of colour, and they're vibrant. So quite often I don't like to use something like a polychromos over a marker base, because I feel like it's a waste of a good pencil. Polychromos to me stand alone a lot of the time. I might use them in very small light amounts over a watercolour base, but to cover up something like this, which is a cheap marker base, I'm happy to use a cheap coloured pencil. And this is a very personal choice, of course, but that's just my logic, my way of thinking, that I don't see the point in using a very expensive artist grade pencil to colour over a cheap water-based marker in a cheap colouring book. I save my polychromos for books with better paper, books that have artworks that I want to do a much more polished piece of colouring, because that's just how my brain works, my logic works, is that I save those better artist quality products for the books that I really enjoy. And when it comes to Amazon printed books, I tend to want to use up my cheap alcohol markers, my cheap water-based markers, and my cheap pencils. And more often than not, they end up being perfectly adequate, and in fact sometimes just work really well on those Amazon printed papers. Now I know that's not the way of thinking for many people, and I'm not judging anyone who does differently, but that's just how my particular logic and thinking works. When it comes to colouring books, I really do enjoy pushing these cheaper products as far as I can to see what I can achieve with them, because for a book that is going to be closed and sitting on a bookshelf, I don't need all of the light fastness and so on. And it can be said that artist grade materials are a lot easier to use, and for ease of use and enjoyment level, then there's no argument. They definitely can be easier to use, and they might have a better range of colours or whatever, but some of us are not always in the position to be able to afford those artist grade products. So it's really useful and good to see how you can stretch your skills to make some of these cheaper things work and still create an image at the end of it that you're really happy with. So I'm really just using mostly the darks to try and deepen the shadows. I do get the white pencil out and try to lighten up with the white pencil, and also I bring a few extra colours in right at the end just to make things pop a little bit. So quite often you don't need a lot of pencil over a marker base. Sometimes it's not a case of having to cover everything up and leaving none of that marker base showing. It's just bringing in the extra little bits of colour that perhaps your marker base might be lacking. And in this case, you know, I needed a little bit of the deeper greens especially, but also that dark warm grey made a difference with the shadows. So here again, I'm just bringing in a little bit of that sort of warm brown into the rocky outcrops, and that's mirroring the colours of the feathers. As you can see, I'm deepening up the feathers a little bit there on that creature as well. So I'm getting quite close to the end now. I really enjoyed colouring this page. I think this is going to be a fun book to colour, to be honest. I like the quirky characters, so I have to say thank you to my friend Annika at Axic Fumbles, because I watched a video that she made recently and she featured this particular book, and I had seen it in the past, but just seeing it again, I really liked the quirky characters that are in it, and the art style is one that I really quite enjoy colouring. So thanks to Annika for showing that particular book. It's not a new release, it's quite an old one. And I'm just sharpening a pencil there because I just want to get into those little details on the edge of her dress. And that part of the paper wasn't really very damaged, so it could cope with a sharper tip. So thank you to everyone who has been leaving messages. I'm sorry that I haven't felt like recording quite so much lately. As I said, I've just been very low in mood and energy levels recently, and I didn't want that to come across in a video. I wanted, you know, to make sure that when I record that you're not going to hear me moaning and whinging, because nobody needs to hear that. So thank you to those of you who have reached out to me and you know, left some lovely comments. It's been very nice to read those, and I do appreciate you all being patient with me while I'm in this slow or low recording mode. So you can see there I've started to bring in a couple of extra little colours, a little bit of red, just to boost that colour up a little bit. It felt like it was a bit flat. And this is actually a Prismacolor white. I find the Prismacolor white to be the best white pencil when it comes to going over the top of anything to bring in a little bit of a highlight. Again, it is my favourite white pencil. So you can see I'm not doing it overly obvious. It's just a bit of light shading just to bring some highlights back into those areas that would be catching the light the most. And the hair was looking a little bit too much like a solid helmet, so I wanted to just bring in a few little highlights here and there. And again, you can see I just keep moving around and around the page. Whenever you add something in one place, you know, you end up tending to notice that other areas are receding too much or they're disappearing or whatever. So, you know, it's just a constant moving around the page. Once that base main colouring is done, this part of it is just, you know, keep looking around the page until something catches my eye that that could do with a little bit of extra something. And that's how I tend to finish off my pages. So I think you'll agree with me that that little bit of extra colour has just added a bit of drama and helped to define some of the areas a bit more than what they were with just that marker base. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me use the markers. I know that water-based markers do bother some people. You know, the getting past streakiness and all that sort of thing is a problem for some people. But I think what it is with water-based markers is that you need to be prepared to keep experimenting. And quite often with the water-based markers, we stop too early. And if you keep pushing through, then you can make that little breakthrough with it. And then, of course, as with this page, you can always add some coloured pencil to your water-based markers. You don't have to. You know, I think if I'd have left it as it was with the markers, it was adequate and it was okay. But just adding the coloured pencil in here has really made it pop that little bit more. So don't be too nervous of playing with water-based markers and experimenting and seeing what you can do with them. If you ever have a page where you just feel like it's lacking and doesn't really have any impact, then just keep working at it. Just add little bits of layers of colour and potentially little added colours like this bit of orange here to make it pop a little bit more. Just keep plugging away at it bit by bit, because I think when people feel like they have not got any impact with their colouring, it really is because they've stopped that little bit too soon and they need to add some extra darks and lights to get the impact, to get the you know, picture to really pop. So here you go. I've decided pretty much, I think, that I've finished at this point. So I'm just showing you a close-up here again of how it looks with the coloured pencil over the top. And there are still some little areas there where I can see the paper pilling, and I will keep, you know, gently rubbing at those to get them off now that the picture is finished. I just tend to get my fingernail and you know, gently rub at those areas to get them off. So just trying to get a close up there for you to see that. So thanks for being with me and watching today. I'll see you again really soon. Bye now. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on the next one.